On July 29th, 2023, a 66-year-old man named James Hendricks set out from the Wolf Ranch trailhead in Arches National Park, heading toward Delicate Arch, one of the most photographed rock formations on Earth. He was not a novice. His sisters would later describe him as the kind of person who had hiked everywhere, done everything, someone who knew how to read a trail. By the time rangers found him, he had been missing for 2 weeks. His body was 2.5 miles off the marked path, in an area with no trail at all. He had not fallen. He had not been attacked by anything. He had not wandered into some disorienting slot canyon where the walls close in and the sky disappears. He had walked out under a clear blue sky, on a trail marked by cairns and painted arrows, inside a park that welcomes over 1.5 million visitors a year. His water bottle was empty. He was taking a medication that made dehydration set in faster than his body could warn him. And the temperature that week never dropped below 100 degrees. His sister, interviewed afterward, said investigators believe he likely completed one long hike that morning, then went back out again that same afternoon for a second, shorter one, the hike that killed him. It is a detail that matters, because it means the danger was not a single bad decision made by someone unprepared. It was a second decision made by someone who had already spent his margin of safety earlier in the day without realizing it, on a body that no longer had the reserves. The first hike assumed it did. Arches doesn't look like a place that kills people. It looks like a postcard. It looks, in fact, exactly like one. Delicate Arch appears on Utah's license plate in tourism campaigns and countless wedding photos taken beneath its 46-foot span of sandstone. It is one of the most recognized natural landmarks in the country, and that recognition is part of the problem. Since the park was established, rangers and search and rescue crews have responded to hundreds of medical emergencies inside its boundaries. Park officials who oversee both Arches and neighboring canyonlands have told local reporters that these calls follow a consistent pattern. Their words were that responses frequently involve heat exhaustion, dehydration, climbing or scrambling, and improper footwear. Not lightning strikes, not flash floods, not wildlife encounters. Heat, dehydration, and simple human misjudgment over and over again on trails that look, from a parking lot, entirely tame. Arches covers just under 77,000 acres of high desert in eastern Utah, a fraction of the size of the Grand Canyon or Death Valley. It contains more than 2,000 documented natural stone arches, the highest concentration on the planet, each one slowly being carved and eventually destroyed by the same forces that created it. The park sits at an elevation between roughly 4,000 and 5,600 feet, high enough that temperature swings are extreme, dry enough that humidity offers almost no relief from the sun. Visitation here tells its own story about how quickly this small park went from a quiet regional attraction to a heavily trafficked national landmark. Between 2011 and 2021, annual visitation grew by roughly 73%, climbing to nearly 2 million people a year, funneled through a road network and trail system that was never built for that kind of volume. The National Park Service eventually introduced a timed entry reservation system just to manage vehicle congestion at the gate. More visitors means more of exactly the kind of person this park is most dangerous for. First-time visitors, unfamiliar with desert conditions, drawn by photographs rather than first-hand experience of what a slick rock summer afternoon actually feels like. Every ranger, every dispatcher, every search and rescue volunteer at Arches is, in effect, managing risk for a population of visitors that has nearly doubled in a decade on trails that haven't grown to match. July here regularly reaches highs around 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and officials have confirmed the park experiences repeated stretches each summer where daytime highs sit at or above that mark for days in a row. A pattern significant enough that, in recent years, the National Park Service paused its own timed entry reservation system for the hottest weeks of the season. Not because they expected fewer visitors to need managing, but because the heat itself does the crowd control. Visitation naturally drops during that window. The people who do come are often the ones least prepared for what they're walking into, arriving at a nearly empty parking lot and reading that emptiness as a sign of safety rather than a warning. The illusion of safety at Arches begins with distance. The hike to Delicate Arch, the park's single most popular destination, is 3 miles round trip. 3 miles sounds like nothing. People walk 3 miles at a shopping mall without thinking about it. But this 3 miles climbs roughly 480 feet over open slick rock, a smooth, undulating expanse of bare sandstone, with almost no shade for the entire route. There are no trees. There is one narrow rock ledge along a cliff face partway through, and after that, nothing but exposed stone and open sky until the arch itself comes into view. Visitors who measure the hike by its length, rather than its exposure, consistently misjudge how much water and time they'll need. The second illusion is accessibility. The trailhead has a paved parking lot, it has a restroom, it has an interpretive sign with a photo of the arch, promising visitors a reward at the end of a short, marked trail. This infrastructure creates the same false signal it creates everywhere else. If the park built a proper trailhead, the hike itself must be manageable for anyone. Families arrive in sandals. Visitors carry a single bottle of water for a hike that, in summer conditions, can require closer to a gallon per person. The National Park Service grades the trail as moderate to strenuous, but almost nothing at the trailhead communicates that strenuousness before a hiker is already committed to the climb. The third illusion is timing, and at Arches it's a particularly cruel one because the park's greatest reward is tied directly to its most dangerous hours. Delicate Arch is famous for golden hour, the hour before sunset, when the sandstone glows deep orange and the shadows stretch long across the slick rock bowl beneath the arch. Photographers plan entire trips around it, but that hour is also, in summer, still one of the hottest stretches of the day, with rock surfaces that have spent 10 hours absorbing direct sun. Visitors who time their hike for the perfect photograph are, without realizing it, timing their hike for peak thermal load, walking out in the accumulated heat of the afternoon and returning to the trailhead well after the sun's warmth should have offered relief, because the sandstone itself keeps radiating stored heat for hours after direct sunlight fades. Park rangers consistently recommend the opposite approach for summer visits. Start at sunrise, not sunset. An early morning hike to Delicate Arch trades the famous golden light for cooler air, rock that hasn't yet absorbed a full day of direct sun, and a trail that's noticeably quieter. It's a straightforward piece of advice, and it's also one that runs directly against the instinct that draws most people here in the first place. The photograph everyone has seen was very likely taken at sunset, and that image is what most visitors are, consciously or not, trying to recreate. This isn't a new problem, and it isn't limited to marquee trails like the one leading to Delicate Arch. Back in the summer of 1991, 2 visitors set out on what was supposed to be a short loop hike through Devil's Garden, a section of the park known for its maze of tall sandstone fence and narrow, disorienting drainages. The 2 men took a wrong turn early on and became separated from each other in terrain, where every fin and every gap looks, from ground level, remarkably similar to the last one. One of them eventually found his way back to a trail and alerted rangers. The other spent 8 hours alone in triple-digit heat, without water, without a hat, without adequate clothing for the sun. When a search helicopter finally spotted him, he was more than a mile from any marked trail, weak, badly dehydrated, and hobbled by cactus spines embedded in his feet. He survived. What makes the case notable is what rangers found afterward. He had walked directly past several potholes and plunge pools still holding water from recent thunderstorms, and never drank from any of them, apparently unaware they were there or unable to recognize them as a resource. Disorientation, it turns out, doesn't just cost hikers their sense of direction. In advanced stages, it can cost them the basic judgment needed to recognize help that's sitting in plain sight. That radiant heat is the mechanism that makes Arches more dangerous than its air temperature alone would suggest. Bare sandstone in direct summer sun can reach surface temperatures dramatically higher than the surrounding air, hot enough, on the worst days, to make bare skin blister on contact, and hot enough to keep radiating heat upward into a hiker's body long after that hiker has stopped moving. Combined with the region's extremely low humidity, which allows sweat to evaporate almost instantly, and gives hikers a false sense that they aren't sweating much at all. The desert here removes water from the body faster than most visitors from more humid climates have ever experienced. The physiology follows a predictable sequence. As core temperature climbs and fluid losses accumulate, the body first tries to compensate through increased sweating and blood vessel dilation near the skin. At sustained core temperatures near 104 to 105 degrees, that cooling system starts to fail. Sweat production can no longer keep pace with heat gain. Beyond that point, cellular stress begins, and the brain, one of the most heat-sensitive organs in the body, starts to lose function before almost anything else. Confusion, poor judgment, a narrowing sense of urgency that convinces people to keep moving toward a goal rather than turn back. This is why heat illness is so often described by rescuers not as a sudden collapse, but as a slow erosion of decision-making that the victim themselves cannot recognize from the inside. Water loss compounds the problem faster than most visitors expect. In dry desert heat, a hiker engaged in moderate exertion can lose close to a liter of sweat an hour, and that fluid carries sodium and other electrolytes out with it. This is why the National Park Service's standard recommendation for this park is not the half liter or so that might get someone through a temperate afternoon hike elsewhere. It is roughly a gallon of water per person for a hike that many visitors expect to finish in under 2 hours. As electrolytes drop alongside water, muscle cramping sets in, coordination worsens, and mental clarity degrades at almost the same rate the legs do, which is precisely why so many of the park's emergency calls involve hikers who were, by their own account, feeling fine less than 30 minutes earlier. It's worth pausing on a piece of physiology that applies far beyond this one trail, because it explains why the return leg of any hike is rarely the relief people expect it to be. Walking uphill and walking downhill place different demands on the body. Climbing burns significantly more energy per step, since it requires lifting your full body weight against gravity with every stride. But downhill walking isn't free. It shifts the strain onto different muscle groups, working them eccentrically, absorbing impact with every step instead of generating it, the reason legs so often feel shakier and more fatigued after a long descent than after the climb itself. What this means in practice is that a hiker who has already crossed into heat exhaustion doesn't get a physiological reprieve just because the terrain finally tilts downward. The dehydration, the electrolyte loss, the cognitive fog are already there, riding along regardless of which direction gravity happens to be pulling. At arches specifically, this shows up in an inverted pattern from most canyon hikes. The steepest climbing happens on the way out to Delicate Arch, while a hiker is still fresh, and the return is technically downhill and technically easier on the cardiovascular system. But by that point, many hikers have already spent their water, their shade windows, and their margin for error. The muscles may have an easier task on the way back. The rest of the body often does not. There's a detail in search and rescue records here that reflects exactly this gap between what the muscles are doing and what the rest of the body is dealing with. Emergencies at arches are reported disproportionately on the return leg, close to the trailhead, from hikers who believe the worst of the hike was already behind them. On the evening of July 12, 2014, that pattern played out on a single trail within the span of a few hours. Park records describe a cluster of heat-related medical emergencies near Delicate Arch, 7 visitors and 1 park employee, all within roughly 24 hours, with temperatures that weekend sitting between 100 and 104 degrees. Rangers first responded to a report of a woman in cardiac distress on the trail. When they arrived, 2 other men nearby were also found suffering from heat exhaustion. Later that same evening, a report came in of an unconscious man near the arch itself. Rescuers hiked in and treated him for heart complications brought on by heat stroke during the carryout. The following afternoon, while a ranger was leading a separate group on a guided hike elsewhere in the park, one of the hikers in that group collapsed and lost her pulse. She was flown out by helicopter and treated for heat stroke. By the end of that 24-hour window, even one of the search and rescue team members needed treatment for heat exhaustion after the operation. Nobody died that weekend, but the sheer density of emergencies, nearly a dozen people incapacitated by heat, on the exact same trail in the exact same day and a half, shows how quickly ordinary summer conditions here can overwhelm a system built for far fewer incidents at once. Not every close call ends in rescue this fast. On June 6, 2010, a 75-year-old man told his wife he was stepping away from their parked car for a short walk to Turret Arch to take photographs. He had no water and no food with him. When he did not return, his wife searched on her own before contacting the park. Rangers, sheriff's deputies, and a helicopter crew searched through the night in temperatures that had climbed above 100 degrees that day. He was found roughly 24 hours after he had gone missing, lying on a rock, barely conscious. He survived, but he was later treated for a fractured wrist and kidney failure brought on by the heat exposure. His kidneys, like many organs, had begun shutting down under the combined stress of dehydration and thermal overload. What had been described as a short walk for photographs turned into a 24-hour search operation and a hospitalization that could easily have ended very differently. Some cases resist a clean explanation entirely, which is its own kind of warning. On August 20th, 2024, a 58-year-old woman became unresponsive on the Delicate Arch Trail. Bystanders began CPR immediately. Rangers, county EMS, and an air ambulance crew responded, but resuscitation efforts were unsuccessful, and she was pronounced dead at the scene. The official cause of death was never publicly confirmed as heat-related. The investigation noted only that she collapsed on a trail known for extreme summer exposure on a day when regional temperatures were typical for late August in Moab. Whether heat was the deciding factor, a contributing one, or unrelated entirely, is something the record simply does not settle. That uncertainty is not a flaw in the reporting. It is a reflection of how heat illness so often layers on top of existing health conditions, accelerating outcomes without ever being cleanly isolated as the single cause. There's a psychological pattern behind almost all of these cases, and it has a name among people who study outdoor fatalities: goal fixation. The tendency to keep pursuing an objective even as the body sends increasingly urgent signals to stop. At Arches, this takes on a very specific, modern shape. Call it frame fever, the compulsion to reach a globally recognized photo opposite before turning back, driven by the knowledge that this exact image, viewed from this exact angle, is something millions of people have seen and sought out before. Delicate Arch isn't just a rock formation. It's a symbol reproduced on postcards, license plates, and travel posters, and reaching it in person carries a kind of cultural weight that a less famous trail simply doesn't. Hikers who feel dizzy or nauseated a quarter mile from the arch are far more likely to push forward than hikers on an anonymous trail with no iconic reward waiting at the end, because turning back means returning home without the photograph everyone expects to see. That pull doesn't discriminate by fitness level or hiking experience. It discriminates by how close the goal appears to be, and at Arches, the goal is almost always visible long before it's actually reached. It's a question worth addressing directly, since it comes up constantly among people planning a visit. Is it actually safe to hike here alone? The honest answer is that solo hiking itself isn't the core danger. Plenty of experienced solo hikers complete this trail safely every day. The danger is what solo hiking removes: a second person to notice early confusion, to insist on turning back, to go for help, while you rest in whatever shade you can find. Nearly every case in this video involved a hiker who was, at some point, alone or briefly separated from their group, not because solitude caused the heat illness, but because it removed the one thing that most reliably interrupts it before it becomes serious: another person watching for the signs you can no longer watch for yourself. The park's own geology offers an uncomfortable parallel to this behavior. In August 2008, Wall Arch, a formation that had stood for thousands of years and drawn its own crowds of photographers, collapsed overnight without warning, reduced to a pile of rubble along the Devil's Garden Trail. No one was hurt. But rangers who studied the collapse noted there had been no unusual weather, no dramatic event to trigger it, simply the accumulated stress of thousands of years of freeze-thaw cycles and erosion finally exceeding what the stone could bear. Arches are not permanent monuments. They are temporary balances of tension and gravity, slowly failing in ways invisible to anyone standing beneath them. The park's more than 2,000 arches will not all still exist in 1,000 years, or even in 100. Some will fall within our lifetimes. Landscape Arch, the longest stone span in North America at over 300 feet, has already shed multiple large sections in the past 3 decades. Visitors once walked directly beneath it. The trail was rerouted after rangers watched slabs the size of small cars break away in the course of a single week. The rock underfoot at Arches is not a fixed backdrop. It is actively, continuously failing, on a timescale too slow for any one visitor to notice. but fast enough that park staff have had to redraw trails around it more than once. Summer here carries a second, quieter hazard that rarely makes the headlines the way heat exhaustion does. Late summer is monsoon season in this part of Utah. Sudden, localized thunderstorms that can drop heavy rain in a matter of minutes, sending flash floods through the park's slot canyons and washes with almost no warning. It is a reminder that a landscape defined by its aridity can just as easily turn violent in the opposite direction, though it is heat, not water, that accounts for the overwhelming majority of medical emergencies here. Balanced rock? Another of the park's signature formations offers the same lesson in miniature. A boulder the size of 3 school buses, perched on a narrowing pedestal of softer stone, visibly closer to toppling with every passing decade of erosion. Rangers do not know exactly when it will fall. They only know that it will. The same way they know that some fraction of the park's other 2,000 arches are quietly approaching the same fate, invisible to the millions of people who photograph them each year as though they were permanent. That is worth sitting with, because it says something true about the landscape people travel here to photograph. Arches National Park isn't hostile in the way a flooding canyon or a collapsing glacier can feel hostile. It does not announce its danger with obvious drama. It sits quietly under an enormous sky, radiating heat back at anyone who stands on it for too long, indifferent to whether that person came prepared or did not. The rock has been eroding since long before there were visitors to photograph it, and it will keep eroding long after this generation of hikers is gone. The heat that makes it dangerous in July is the same dry, punishing climate that shaped every arch worth walking 3 miles to see. None of this means the park should be avoided. Millions of people hike to Delicate Arch every year and leave with nothing worse than a sunburn and a good photograph. The people who don't make it back safely are, overwhelmingly, the ones who treated 3 miles of exposed sandstone the way they'd treat 3 miles on a sidewalk. Misjudging not the distance, but everything the desert adds on top of it. Carrying enough water, timing a hike around the coolest hours instead of the best light. Recognizing that feeling almost there is exactly the moment heat exhaustion convinces the most experienced hikers to keep walking instead of turning around. None of these precautions require special equipment or advanced training. They require treating a 3-mile desert hike as what it actually is, rather than what its short distance and paved trailhead suggest it might be.